Despite the limitations with scholarships and NIL, Penn State football is still going to focus pretty heavily on the transfer portal here past the deadline over high school football recruiting. Now, why is that?
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Now, even though Penn State's at a disadvantage, the transfer portal is still everything in this day and age of college football. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Let's welcome him back. Brian Smith, the Locked On recruiting expert here on the network. He also covers Miami of Florida, Auburn. You can keep up with him on X for all of his recruiting takes and information, so much more. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Penn State, we've talked about this. Why they've gone silent in the transfer portal has everything to do with that scholarship limit. So, Brian, is there any good news? Is there any hope that Penn State could land a last-second commitment out of the transfer portal? Probably not.
It depends on your perspective, because can they get a player? Yes. Can they get one that Penn State fans want them to get? Probably not. Those are two different things, though. The elite kids, like talking to a few people, you're paying over $500K for a number 2 defensive tackle for 1 year. Penn State's not going to do that, I don't think. I mean, they're pretty good up front anyway. They need offensive players.
Right.
And I don't think there's a receiver out there that would be that guy anyway. So I don't see it. Now, they could get a player somewhere else, but this is the other part of it. A lot of schools are being really picky about who they take, and I get it. And they're also worried about screwing up their locker room. If Penn State has one thing going for it, its culture is pretty good. I mean, they got more guys than they have for scholarships, technically. There's only a few schools in that boat right now. I know Notre Dame's one. I want to say I can't remember. LSU might be one, but there's a few in that boat where kids, they're okay if they don't want to play. They want the degree. They like where they're at. They're okay with being backups. So Penn State's roster is not in a bad spot. They just need like one or two more game changer players, but everybody wants those. And I just don't see where that's going to come from. So I think Penn State's probably going to stay put unless they just add a backup.
And that's what I've said. So this almost confirms what I said when the deadline had passed. Posted a recap episode. I encourage people to go check it out, especially with the bunch of transfers that went in, the 6 players that were lost that came announced after the deadline here. So for Penn State, they're still in a tough spot. So this has been consistent all the way along. Brian, a couple weeks ago, we said that, hey, we don't really expect Penn State to add an impact player because, they're trying to fundraise for NIL. That's one element to this. So what does their NIL situation look like? Then they're over the scholarship limit. So good luck trying to tell an impact player that they're going to, you're going to have to play. You're not going to be able to go here on a full ride. We're going to give you we're going to pull some NIL funds together for you separately, right? You're not going to get both. Good luck trying to tell a top impact player that. And then just frankly, there's nobody left. There's nobody left. The winter portal, the original transfer portal cycle going into this next season, going into the offseason, there was the first one and then the second one after spring football had finished, practices had finished. And the first window was a lot more better in terms of how much talent was there, but that means everybody committed. And Penn State did win the transfer portal, Brian. Maybe you disagree because you think they're missing out on 1 or 2 more impact players. And I agree with that they're missing those players, but they still have the depth. They were able to go and get 4 potential starters in that first portal window. And it could have been a lot worse, because I'm going to get your thoughts on King Mack coming up in just a moment. But that's my point, is Penn State still won, but don't expect that they're going to get any transfers, any impact players at this point in time.
Yeah, that's very fair. Penn State, they're on that cusp and fans want them to take the next leap. And I absolutely, applaud them for wanting that. Sometimes you got to be careful about what you ask for, though. Sometimes they also added by getting rid of certain players, one of which may have just signed with Auburn. I don't know. Depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
He's good, but like there's different stories on that. So we'll find out if Auburn got a good player in the locker room or not. But Kendra Lambert Smith, that's just one guy too. They got other players, like you said, in December. They're going to help them. At the end of the day, they still need the passing game to be better, play calling to be better. It's more fundamental stuff than surely what is it? They got to have like 13 guys still left at the receiver position, something like that on the depth chart.
11 on scholarship anyway.
Yeah. I mean, one of them has to step up and be a guy. I mean, one. So I don't think that's a transfer portal problem. That's somebody's got to develop. That needs to be taken care of in Happy Valley.
Let's talk about this phenomena, because in the age of the transfer portal, high school football recruiting is going to be put to the side, and we're kind of saving the focus on that for the final segment as far as what the goals that they would have for the high school football recruits. But it is win now, win now, win now. It's Penn State, even though they are pretty hindered as far as what they can do in the transfer portal, they're still going to focus on the portal and wait for high school recruiting until after that basically until June. You're really not going to hear a lot of high school football recruiting news or breaking news out of the Penn State circle until June because of the transfer portal.
They're on that cusp. They're one of those 5 to 8 teams just outside the Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama kind of realm that, like, if they get that one guy, they enter that realm. You know what I mean? So I understand they want to focus on that. If they're going to use NIL for somebody or set up a deal, they'd make an exception for that kid instead of somebody that's 17, 18 years old. Yes. I get it. I don't disagree with that. And also it's a scholarship thing. Penn State, like I said earlier, it's bizarre they have so many kids sticking around. It's a credit to them, but it's a weird problem. Like, I've never experienced this before, but again, Notre Dame's having the same thing. They got a lot of kids that don't even care if they play. I don't know what you do. Like, it's kind of ugly to cut kids, but at some point you got to get down to 85 too. So I think Penn State is going to be much more careful about taking a 3-star kid and pick the position, because unless you're an impact guy, they're not going to take high school kids right now. They've done a great job over the last 2-3 classes. Franklin and his staff are tremendous on the trail. They got a loaded roster, just not as balanced as they'd like at receiver. Again, it's the same thing. So once we get to end of May and the official visits, May 31st is a big weekend for a lot of schools. You'll start seeing, so I'm sure Penn State's got some kids coming in. You'll start seeing a few kids visit. And then by June 20th, all hell will break loose, if you will. Yeah. And the commitment wave will be across the nation. But until then, because the portal ends, it doesn't mean kids are done. That means they have to have their name in. It doesn't mean they have to decide where they go. That's a whole different ball of wax. So Penn State should be in pretty good shape. I think they'll be in a good spot. And maybe the numbers won't say it, but Penn State's portal is a little different because their impact was with like you said, they got 4 starters already, and they didn't lose a ton of guys. Yeah. So it's not one way or the other. You got to look at what attrition that you took on as well. And Penn State did pretty good there.
So that's just it. Penn State right now has priority towards the transfer portal. They would rather get a veteran, depending on what scale that is. They would rather take a veteran for 1 to 2 years as opposed to, again, a 3-star, maybe that player's a 4-star, but someone that's going to have to develop long-term. And as we saw, that didn't exactly, work out with the likes of a King Mack or Carmelo Taylor, who just recently left the program. So speaking of King Mack, I mean, Brian, you were based out of Florida. Now you're based out of Alabama. But when you were in Florida, you got to know King Mack very well. Some of those other Florida prospects. Is Penn State wasting time recruiting so far out of state? We're going to discuss that coming up next after the break. And today's episode is sponsored by Yahoo Finance. When it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools, all the data you need in one place. They're the number one financial destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors And it's how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on the way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That is yahoofinance.com. Brian, you're the person to talk to about this just because you've been based in SEC territory for the longest time in Penn State with J1 Sider and the success that they've had landing commits from Florida. But then King Mack enters the transfer portal, right? And it doesn't seem like everybody the players from out of state usually go back into the transfer portal just because of, a variety of different reasons. I don't know that King Mack's homesick or anything, but it begs the question. I'll give a shout out to the Keystone Kickoff Show, the Keystone Network, for posing this idea. Is Penn State wasting its time in the state of Florida? You look at King Mack was not patient. He did not want to wait for whatever the reason was. That had to do with playing time, NIL. He wanted to be closer to home. That's fine. All those reasons make sense in this day of college football. But is Penn State actually wasting its time? I say no. I say that it's still, if a player wants to commit to Penn State, go and get them, because Elliot Washington's still on the team. Katron Allen's still on the team. So it's not like they're not having any success in the southern states. So at the end of the day, if a player, it doesn't matter where they're located. If they're in California and they want to play at Penn State, get their commitment and have them join the program. I don't think geography matters in this case. It's not where you start, it's where you finish your football career. But you're the expert here. So are they wasting their time?
I don't think they're wasting Sider. Let's start with him. He's a Fort Lauderdale area guy. I forget which high school he went to and all that, but he's from Broward, and that's the area that is just loaded. So he's going to know a little bit more than most. And that's where King's from. He went to St. Thomas Aquinas, arguably the most famous high school over the last 30 years. And he's a great kid. I know him well. It just didn't work out. And he's transferring. I know Alabama and Miami, among others, are recruiting him. So obviously talent is not the issue here. He's a safety, 5'10", 190 pounds, built like a boxer, put together. But overall, you just got to be selective with each kid. Every recruitment is different. You start from zero with each one. Now, most Florida kids, even if they're top 50, probably do not fit Penn State, because most Florida kids don't do well away from home. King Mack is much more worldly, well-rounded, went to a private Catholic school. They travel all over the place. That's a different deal, and that's just unfortunate. If you're taking flyers on kids who have character issues, I would straight up call Penn State and James Franklin out. They're not. Yeah. So it's different. Every now and then you're going to miss on kids. This past weekend at OT7, I was speaking with a few recruits, some considering Penn State or committed or whatever, but I was talking to Vernell Brown. He plays at Jones in Orlando, national recruit, arguably the best slot receiver in the country. Okay. And he said something that I agreed with. We just kind of went on about it. He said, Florida kids, they're not going to wait. They're going to transfer if you're not playing by their sophomore year for the most part. I think Burnell would have committed to Ohio State already, but they're so loaded receiver, he doesn't really want to wait either. He's, elite player, but Ohio State's receiver room, as you well know, is just completely loaded.
Yeah.
So I get it. So he may not go there. He's smart enough to figure that out, but some kids always just think they're going to go in and start, and then they get themselves in a bad spot and they hit the transfer portal. Make sure you know who you're recruiting. Make sure you know about what's going to happen year to year. Look at the depth chart and be realistic, although a lot of kids just can't do that. So if you're a coach, you got to ask them, hey, let's be honest here. If you're not starting by your junior year, would you stay? I would start asking that, just straight up, because it's better not to take the kid if he's like, I have to start, but then you got to go away. You got to take different kids. So I think Florida is a state that Penn State should continue to spot recruit, and St. Thomas Aquinas is certainly a place they should hit every year.
Oh yeah.
And they're recruiting kids from IMG. They're recruiting kids from the private schools in the central part of the state, like Tampa and whatnot. They'll be fine. But again, each player that you covet, you start at zero. And you got to do your due diligence. Penn State's an easy sell as a program. 110,000 people, blah, blah, blah. Great tradition, but it's not for everybody. And it's in the middle of nowhere for A lot of Florida kids
compared to Florida. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so far away. So they don't even know where it's at on a map. But that's the challenge.
Well, both sides of this argument actually can be true. Is Penn State wasting its time in Florida? No. But would they be? Would it be more beneficial to them to continue to focus on Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Ohio, DC, Maryland, Virginia? Absolutely. If a King Mack type of player is in Florida or is in Maryland, you would probably side with the Maryland kid. Like, geography does matter here. So I'm not saying that they waste their time. If you can tell that they're, again, we just saw, who did we just see commit? Alvin Henderson. Thought he was born and raised Auburn or somebody. He was going to go to Alabama, right? He was going to stay in his home state. Ends up committing to Penn State. Now, I know a lot can change here, but right, if they're a fit for your program, you take the commitment and you try to develop them in the best player possible. But it's also true that, hey, geography matters. Distance from your family and friends matter. When we heard from Julian Fleming to Nolan Rucci for the first time, they said how important it was for them and how much they didn't realize having friends and family. They'd be able to drive up an hour for practice. They're close to games. They can go back home. They can see their hometown whenever they want, rather than trying to coordinate flights left and right. That stuff matters. So if you have a player that's in the New Jersey area that's comparable to the kid in Florida, I understand leaning with the kid in New Jersey, but at the same time but if you're getting more attention from the player in Florida, like it's reciprocated, and the player in New Jersey is like, well, I'm interested, but the player in Florida is like, hey, yeah, I'm all in on Penn State. I like what you guys are saying. That's how this works. So it's not cookie cutter. You can't just say, oh, well, they're in Florida, so forget about them. But you have to weigh those options, and geography does matter. But I do not think Penn State's, because of the way college football is, that anybody can go anywhere at this point in time. It was different during the Joe Pa era in the 80s, 90s, where you had to truly dominate the state and dominate your region. But now, because it's nationalized, I mean, heck, Penn State gets players from out of the country, right? They get recruits from out of the country. So geography matters, but it doesn't.
I don't think Penn State should really change what they're doing. But you brought up a really good point about if you got a similar player in Maryland, it's better to take him if you can choose, not that you really get to,
right?
Because that kid's just less likely to transfer. And in today's era, that matters. I think also with the transfer portal being set up where you can immediately transfer is one of the reasons that kids will take a chance on going farther from home now. It used to be when you had to sit out, kids didn't want to do that. They didn't want to do that at all. So they would stay closer to home because they knew it would be easier. Now with that portal, it just, like, a kid from Seattle could end up at the University of Florida. A kid in Orlando could end up at Oregon or anywhere else. I mean, there's just no rhyme or reason. You just got to make sure that the fit is there to try to mitigate it to the best of your ability.
Now, still to come, high school football recruiting is going to heat up here in a matter of weeks, even though it's going to be quiet for the most part, because the transfer portal has to ultimately finish up, even though the deadline is passed. 2 future Penn State players showed out recently at some camps. What does Penn State have on its checklist for the month of May going into June? Well, that's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And since this is a transfer portal recruiting episode, let's talk about the leaders in job recruiting, LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. So you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Now, LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you find professionals you cannot find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to a new, better, perfect role for them. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional with LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing a lot of hats and might not necessarily have the time to devote to hiring. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. 2.5 million small businesses, that's right, 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn Jobs for hiring. So be one of them. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Gear up for the ultimate NBA and NHL face-offs. FanDuel is welcoming new customers with a golden opportunity. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with just any winning $5 bet. That's right. That's $150, a whopping $150 to play on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. So don't miss out on this exclusive offer. Head over to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on and seize your chance to turn every playoff moment into a victory. With FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, the thrill never stops. Join the winning team today and experience the excitement like never before. Elevate your game, make every shot count, make every goal count, and dominate the playoffs with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So it seems Penn State is at least on the right track with its class of 2025 as two commits showed out at some recent high school football recruiting camps, some showcases. Those two players were DJ McClary and Lyric Samuel. I guess, Brian, we should start with wide receiver because I feel like Penn State's always been in good hands with linebacker, especially as of late. For wide receiver, you need all the help you can get. For Lyric Samuel to continue to develop because he almost seemed like a unicorn in this case. He's 6'4", he's 170 pounds. Okay, so he's a little light, but he's extremely fast. He runs very well for that 6'4" frame. You can't teach speed. They'll obviously have him probably bulk up to 190, 200. And we've seen other players do that. But for him to continue to trend upwards, to ascend through these recruiting rankings, he seems to be the consensus #1 prospect out of the state of New York. Again, you need all the help you can get at wide receiver. And I feel like I wish he was in the class of 2024 because I think he's almost somebody that could come in at least contend for some playing time right away. But he is in the senior class for 2025, and I like what I've seen from him in small sample sizes outside of high school.
Yeah, when you get the guys that have the upside like that, if you get a bouncy kid that's got the jets and he's 6'3" or above, I mean, if you're a Penn State fan, you should always be excited about that, and you should if you're Texas or anybody else too. It's kind of nice that they're getting a kid from the state over and kind of going off what we talked about a few moments ago. They're not getting him from Georgia or Texas or Florida. It's going to be a little easier to keep a kid from Brooklyn around than it would be a kid from somewhere down south.
And that other player, DJ McClary at line, I mean, Penn State picked up two more linebacker recruits, and they're very good as well. Alex Tatch is extremely talented. Deshaun Burnett. Now, depending on where you look, there's kind of a discrepancy as far as how Tatch is rated. But On3 has him as one of the best linebacker commits in the entire class of 2025 rankings. For DJ McClary, he seems to be a consensus top 20 linebacker, one of the best players in New Jersey. Now, my biggest concern is with Penn State, and again, I don't know anything. I'm not trying to allude to anything, but let's kind of, let's look around the room here. Penn State goes and gets two more linebacker commits after McClary, and then they're looking for potentially a fourth linebacker commit in this class. It's almost like the running back conversation we had, that maybe there might be too many commitments in 2025 at one position. And then Fran Brown comes back into the picture, right? So he's going to be in his here. But bottom line, McClary, again, continues to show out. I think that top 20 ranking for him at the linebacker spot is arbitrary. I think he's going to move up. He should move up. If you look at Rivals, they have him as a top 10 linebacker, which based on this recent camp seems to be a little more accurate here. But at the end of the day, he's just a dude. I'm going to steal that line from you. He's just a dude. He's very athletic. He's very smart. He's very smart, and Penn State needs to find a way to keep him in the class if things just get a little too crowded here at the linebacker spot.
Sometimes you got to take the best players, and if somebody else leaves, you know what? This is Penn State. May the best man win. If you're not for competition, Penn State probably wasn't the best choice for you anyway. I don't have any problem with it. I mean, that's exactly how I would do it too if I was James Franklin. Bring the best guys in, man. It is what it is.
And it's good that, for someone like Tom Allen to come in. Again, these were Manny Diaz. Up until this point, Manny Diaz was recruiting them, and DJ McClary committed under Manny Diaz. So it's good that Tom Allen has come down, secured the fort and everything, and these players commit still to Tom Allen, stay committed with a change as the defensive coordinator, as the linebackers coach. Now the goals for May, we kind of talked about that, alluded to the fact that, hey, or discussed it really intensely, the fact that Penn State is going to focus on the transfer portal until everything's finished. There are no more available players because they would rather side with the veteran that can help them win now. That's going to take from NIL funds. They're kind of, again, I don't want to say that they can't do anything, but the scholarship limitations, even with NIL helping out in this day and age, are extremely difficult to navigate, because it's going to be tough to tell any player that you can't that isn't already at Penn State that you can't have a full ride. So when you look at high school recruiting, again, it's just going to be quiet. I'm eager that they have the Elite 11 regional back in State College. So that's another opportunity for Penn State to host some recruits. That's at the tail end of May here. That's very important for them to be obviously present, active, and they're of course not going to ignore that. That's where they got Ethan Grunkmeyer a 1 year ago to commit. He had that showing. He ended up qualifying for the final and ended up finishing as a top 10 quarterback commit in that class. I don't think there's going to be that kind of story. I know there's not going to be that kind of story this time around, because Penn State, there was that buildup that, hey, Ethan Grunkmeyer is trending towards Penn State. He needs to have a good showing at the Elite 11. He did. There really isn't a similar player to that extent. But Penn State, when Luke Reynolds was the number one player, at least one of the number one skilled position guy from that event a year ago as well. I think that Penn State, again, we won't see the news break until June. That's when everything's going to go crazy in terms of high school football recruiting. But in the Elite 11, can they make any noise there, Brian?
There's always a way to do that. First off, you got to continue to recruit the underclassmen, which Penn State's done a great job with. Mm-hmm. And to that point, a South Florida kid that I know very, very well, Raja Bell's son, Dia Bell. Raja played in the NBA for a long time.
Yes.
They're going to be going up to Penn State for that event. They'll visit Penn State. I talked to both of them this past weekend, and they're making the rounds. Texas, Penn State, Miami, all over. He's a national recruit, potential 5-star quarterback. Penn State's involved. So that's one kid. Far as the 25 class adding another kid, I don't know. It would have to be somebody that really improved and showed out, but that happens. Sometimes a kid will show up that's an outer region guy like Dia. He's from Florida. He missed other events in his area because he had other events going on with 7-on-7. So you never know who's going to come to the camp and who's going to visit. So Penn State definitely has a chance.
Brett, I think this is all about 2026. And I can't say, well, that's boring or not. It's high school football recruiting regardless, but you have to be patient here. Dia Bell is a member of the class of 2026. So Penn State, like you said, I don't know about a rising senior in this case, but a rising junior. And the future of recruiting is going to be at least in the spotlight for the time being until the transfer portal wraps up, because the transfer portal and the class of 2025 are right on top of each other right now. Okay. When the transfer portal's finished, they'll go back to 2025, but you can do whatever you want as far as the class of 2026 goes.
Yeah, there's a lot of evaluations going on. There are kids in the class of 27 and 28 getting verbal offers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just true.
Penn State's very active there too. Yeah.
So it's part of it. There's different takes on it. If you don't throw your hat in the ring early with certain kids, you might tick off their coach or their parent. There's a lot of takes on it, but even Urban and Nick and Kirby, they've offered kids that are 8th, 9th graders during their time too. You know what I mean? Like if they're doing it, that kind of puts it in perspective. You got to keep up with the Joneses. So don't be surprised if you're scrolling on X and you see some kid offered from Ohio or New Jersey or something. Like Penn State offered a freshman in high school. Yeah, they did.
That'll do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Brian, I appreciate the time as always. Thank you for coming back on the show to give your national perspective on high school football recruiting and the transfer portal as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Zach.
And thanks so much again for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. If you enjoyed this conversation, leave a like, share it with friends and family, join the conversation in the comments section. Let me know your thoughts on Penn State football recruiting. And if you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast for the latest discussions around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And don't forget, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. You can find Locked On Sports Today now available on YouTube and the free Fire TV channels app.